Welcome to Gray Overload. And Nvidia is doing some investment into Intel, which this created a lot of thoughts. I've been out for a few days, and now that I'm back here, finally able to go through, look at some news, and see what happens. I was a little shocked here that this had happened, and I am very interested to see how this is all going to roll out over the years. But until that actually happens, let's go through some of the things that I've been thinking about and kind of what this deal is about, right? Nvidia is going to have about 5% of Intel common stock, from what I understand, at the purchase price of $23.28, right? And they have to go through all closing and approval stuff and everything else. So they're going to have about 5% of Intel. Now, out of that, it seems like that there's going to be some joint work here happening, right? From the Intel side, the CEO Lip Bhutan had gone through and said that they are going to have, let's see, what do you say here? Benefit customers on x86 architecture. NVLink will be shaping the future of the AI infrastructure and personal computing. So they are also going to, I was reading the Intel thing where they are going to design and manufacture custom data center and client CPUs with NVIDIA NVLink. That is the headline, actually. So this is fascinating to me. I'm having a lot of fun here. Now, first off, I'm going to come into this like some people may think that this is going to be horrible for AMD, whatever else. I actually think that AMD is going to be a huge benefactor in some of this as well, because it kind of get to me, AMD does have to take that initiative, but it gives AMD an ability to actually take some big swings now without having to alienate some of the slow moving clients that want to make sure that there's this is exactly going to be what's going to happen next, right? Once you get entrenched in an area or get dominant, right, you kind of have to go more slow moving. Well, since Intel's kind of and Nvidia are kind of taking big swings coming together, that allows you to also take another big swing. Hopefully you don't wait on that big swing, because that could be a negative. And it does kind of remind me a little bit about when, back when Apple was having trouble and Microsoft was going through a whole bunch of antitrust, and then all of a sudden Microsoft did some investment into Apple. There's some of that reminder in me. So I I have some very like precautions there of saying, well, how good is this going to be for the industry? Now, maybe Intel's going to come out and do a Apple-like thing and all of a sudden rock the socks off, and Nvidia is still going to be worth a lot of money and everything else, and Intel's going to be worth, a lot of money, and they're going to be all off to the races. But you could also have one industry where all of a sudden it takes off, and while you have a lot of money, you are kind of going into the IBM era. And I just don't want that to happen, right? I like the competition around. So I actually think that there's a long-term play here from Nvidia. I think Nvidia wants a couple things out of Intel. I think one of them is an x86 license. I think that they're hoping to do this. This also tells me, Semi-Accurate has an article. Go check it out, what they're doing. But he had some notes on NVIDIA's CPU and how ready it is and how, where it's at. Well, if you're coming through and want Intel to kind of design some CPU stuff and everything else, I have some questions on where your CPU is, unless there's, you know, government stuff behind the way. But I actually think that Nvidia wants it. And the other thing that, let's say Nvidia did not want their licensing. I think the other thing that came to me while I was thinking about this, when I was coming back from what I was doing in the past couple days, is does Nvidia actually not maybe not want the license, but maybe want the fabs, and they're willing to go down this route to maybe get the fabs underneath them rather than underneath Intel. I Nvidia likes the control of things, right? They like to make things. Well, we've seen like there's been different GeForce programs throughout time that have been leaked that Nvidia likes their control with their design of the GPUs. They like that control. Well, would they like to control the manufacturing side so that they know where everything's at? You know, there could be something in there where NVIDIA's final destination is that Intel fabs, Intel's just a CPU design shop because Intel's not going to be continuing to do GPUs right now, right? There's no way NVIDIA wants that to happen, which I think is actually a detriment to Intel in the long run. Even if Intel was going to close ARC, now Moore's Law was dead as one of the first ones there to do it, and to say that that was kind of just winding down a few years back now. I had my skepticism to begin with if Intel would ever carry it out because we've seen this story before again and again. Now, you have to be careful, right? While this is an infusion of cash, and I think Intel needs it, you can kind of get into areas where, uh, yeah, if we got the infusion of cash, we're looking pretty good financially, and now we are just bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. Yeah, we have a good CPU, but we have no other viable paths forward in expanded business, and that could be one area there. And I one of my notes I was taking is if they were to finally develop, and let's say it's on the same socket that the Nova Lake's going to be on, and this is not going to be any time like by Nova Lake, right? I'm talking like down the road. Let's say it's an Intel socket chip with NVIDIA graphics, which we'll get into some of Moore's Law's dead stuff that he released a video on, which I think is really kind of, forward-looking. But if you were able to throw that into an Intel board, granted, there may be an NVIDIA labeled chip and CPU that Intel makes the CPU side, NVIDIA has the graphics on, that has its own socket platform. I could see that as well. But if you put one in where on your current platform you get this benefit, an APU, I really think that there's going to be a huge option here. I think it's going to change the ITX market. I think the AMD Halo chips have the opportunity to, but you get that Intel NVIDIA chip to do that, it will change it. Unless, again, AMD could beat them there, and all of a sudden Intel's playing catch up. There could be that. Like I kind of mentioned before, I think that this will make AMD better and make AMD have to be like, we need to take some swings, we need to do some things, and we have a good business model, and we're going to do and make this industry go forward. I think this pressure and this competition between the companies will be good. I just wish that it was between three instead of two, but we saw where three was going to, and Intel just wasn't viable really as a overall company, not just for graphics, just overall, right? They have a money problem, and that is what's going on here, right? Intel's is very desperate for cash, very, very desperate. They went on a buying spree. They had held a lot of debt on there. Remember, they got Mobileye, they had Altera. They were buying a lot of stuff, and that what is it? Some of the stuff has now been sold off, if I recall, and they never integrated it. They never made it a lot profitable, right? When was it Xilinx was bought by AMD? What did they do? They made that integrated. They put that to an NPU. That FPGA is being in there in a lot of different things. They made sure that when they acquired that product, they're going and moving it forward. Intel did not do that at the rate I thought they needed to, and it's showing, right? That we see where Intel is. They needed to make a drastic change, and I don't know if this is the drastic change they should have went down. I thought Royal Core and some of the stuff they were thinking about would have been that drastic change, but they're tight on cash, right? I mean, Intel was so desperate they're working with Nvidia, knowing the history of everyone that's worked with Nvidia, what has happened, right? They are soul crushing, tight gripped, around the company. Ask Apple how that relationship went. I have a lot of respect for Nvidia, but it's just this is how they kind of run their business, and I see why, right? They're able to produce and control a very good product, and especially on the ASI side, they're demanding a great premium for this. So you can see where they're coming from. So they're going to want a lot, and hopefully Intel can deliver that for them as well. But I do think that this could make Intel worse off in the end, especially if. Can, here, just hear me out on this idea. Here's a couple of them, right? Think about Intel, and they just get CPU design, but they also sell, because they need money, sell an x86 license to Nvidia, and then eventually their fabs go, and Intel's now fabless with only an x86 license. Granted, they'd still have to get the 64-bit license from AMD, right? So they'll have to do that. I'm sure AMD would probably be willing to do that license if they have x86, but yeah, that'd be. Yeah, that's just a generic license. You got VIA with other license, but I don't think Nvidia was going to buy VIA. Um, d- Now, TSMC. This is one that I wanted to get into. Actually, first, before we go to TSMC and talk about that, when AMD was desperate, right? Remember what they did? They were selling off their buildings, making sure their inventory was well managed, making sure products that were delivered were only going to be really made money, made a deal with, and really what saved them was a lot of the council work after they sold or sold their headquarters and was renting it back. They did a lot of that stuff trying to get back, and then they swung for the fences and really developed Zen for that. Intel's taking a different approach, right? They're desperate. They want to, kind of get some cash infusion, and this was it for them. And yeah, that was one thing that I was kind of concerned about. One thing, was looking there right now. TSMC, right, is making chips for Nvidia and Intel. At some point, do they just say, not anymore, right? I am very curious to see what happens here. Uh, and you could say, well, NVIDIA doesn't have any of that structure to kind of help them develop that. That's true, but like TSMC, while they make the chips, now if NVIDIA is making some of their chips on Intel, that is a competition thing. And, there is some technology transfer that has to be there just to be able to design the chips and get a manufacturer on TSMC. It, I don't think anything will come of that. That's just a thought I had, and that could get really interesting really quick. So uh, that that is that would make this all the much more fun to watch, right? As somebody being entertained, that would be fun to watch. As somebody that wants better products out and the fastest products at the best price point, that would, well, I guess the competition, if TSMC and Intel were competing at a fabs, or what do we call it, Intel, right? Intel, right? Nvidia, Intel fabs, Intel. That's got a ring to it. Spin it off, make it Intel. We'll see. Not Intel. Uh, Envid, uh, Envitel, in yeah, Envitel, yeah, something. I'm just combining stuff right now. Put what you would do for a fab between Intel and Nvidia in the comments below. Let's see what unique names you get before I just spend time just trying to go through names here. But the AMD versus Intel and Nvidia, right? That's the big thing here that is going to be a lot talked about. I think that we are still few years off before this kind of really comes to fruition. Maybe you can get it done by 2027. I really think you're more at a late 2028, 2029, 2030 time frame, depending upon how everything goes. I think they're going to work on data center and AI there first. You got to get all the engineering and everything kind of across, make sure everything's manufacturing right. There's some time there, right? Depending upon, let's say NVIDIA wants like a newer CPU design, and it's not just throwing some of their other x86 together. They want these performance things in it. That could be a longer, especially if it's more, architectural change. That could be a change there for them to take some time with. NVIDIA, or I should say NVIDIA, AMD already kind of competes with, well, kind of. They compete with Intel and NVIDIA. Now, them being combining, right, is just a different way in competition. So the whole AMD thing is that they got to be looking at stuff like this anyways. Like, what if Intel all of a sudden got good on CPUs? What if Intel already got good at GPUs and we're competing in this space? We had to have an APU to be delivered already, right? What if Nvidia's chip was all of a sudden there? What do we have to do for that to be able to compete in there as well? And I'm really curious of where does this leave Nvidia's whole N1's CPU? What does that do? Do they now move on from that and go to x86? That would be really telling, actually, to me. I actually, I keep thinking in my head that there's going to be AMD's going to have like an ARM APU, and Nvidia will have one too, and they're going to compete on that with Qualcomm and going to Windows. But if they go this route, I actually think one of the biggest losers is Qualcomm. I think that that whole scenario of ARM CPUs working in Windows, NVIDIA will have the Intel, you'll have the Intel CPU side, you'll have the GPU side, and AMD's already x86. They've seen improvements. Intel's seen improvements there too. What's stopping them from just being like, you know what? I get Microsoft wants it, but the sales numbers probably will not be there, and Qualcomm's probably going to be the odd one out on this. Like I think that there's more there. I actually think AMD's going to take some more swings. Could be a weird world out there that when all of a sudden where Qualcomm is the king of the mobile space, but then now cannot break into that area of of the desktop space as much anymore because who knows? Maybe Microsoft even improves Windows to be better at sleep, and for x86, and this is all solved anyways, right? Um, yeah, that is just something I've been thinking about. Now, I want to mention this again because I think it's important. Remember, it's got to be a few years ago when ARCs first came out a little bit. Moore's Law is dead, and I want to give him credit here because he's one of the first ones that said it would be, he was hearing that it's going to be a slow ride of cancellation, right? I'm paraphrasing there, but that's how I kind of saw it, right? I was always cautious with it, but I didn't have any inside information. He said ARC's effectively canceled. There's going to still be some releases, but it's not going to be a huge thing, right? It's not going to be just something they're going to keep throwing money at. That's a whole other story, right? We could see where it is, right? That was already signs of the times. We already knew Intel had some issues. So he did a good job reporting that. Nvidia is making a graphics tile, and Moore's Law is dead is saying, that'd be Titan Lake in like 2029. That'd be really kind of cool to see that graphics tile versus AMD graphics tile. I actually, at that point, I do not think that there'll be like a whatever 50 series card there is at that point. NVIDIA is going to scrap that. There will be no low-end stuff. It will be NVIDIA and AMD versus, and there will be no additional low-end cards kind of adds on. If you want a bigger one, I could actually see in this there is no mobile like external GPUs. It would be very shocking to me to see if there was a mobile external GPU at this point, unless it's like for the very, very high end, right? I could see something like a 5090, or at that point it'd be something else, right? A 90 series card that is something you add in, something that's really powerful. So that would be at that point something that they probably put in a laptop separately, but to get more memory for AI or whatever else. But AMD's already got 128 gigs in some of these. Do you need that? So do these big laptops, these gaming laptops, all of a sudden go to just a single chip, which you can do quite a bit on? Would be really interesting to see. You know, um, One other thing that Moore's Law is Dead said in his video about this that I really want to make a comment on is he was saying that he was getting reports from Intel saying that Intel, they're showing collapses in some areas of their laptop lines. And that's Intel's stronghold, right? To me, that is Intel's very much stronghold. They do not want to lose that. I think that they don't want to lose data center, but the one thing they really didn't want to lose was laptop. To me, that was their number one priority, number one stranglehold, their bread and butter, what they've always done. And AMD continued to chip away. Let's say they get this out in 2029. They got what, 3 years, depending upon when in 2029, 3.5 years to get this done. Their market share could get up there, 40, 50%, someplace in there in the laptop space. If that happens, right, that's going to be, and if they keep, doing nice with RDNA 5, these things, let's say the consoles are going to come out, that'll have some infusion of cash and probably publicity too, especially if AMD is coming off of RDNA 4 really well. RDNA 5, let's say they do RDNA 6, should be getting close by that time, or what is that, UDNA something at that point. You can see where they're stacking up against Nvidia already to be competitive, and let's say they start selling a lot of their stuff, not just for, let's say AI is still where it's at, still at the level, they still sell gaming cards. It could be something where really they are impressive against Nvidia, and this just makes it harder for Intel as well to get their footing. I really see this as an Nvidia AMD versus still though. I actually don't see many pluses for Intel besides the cast and fusion. They can be using Nvidia tiles forever and just, on their CPUs. At what point does it kind of reverse though? And Nvidia goes, we want your CPU tiles on our GPUs. I think that's I think everyone's phrasing it as Intel, CPUs, and even I am doing that, right? And then having the Nvidia tile. I actually think eventually it becomes Nvidia GPUs wanting a CPU tile from Intel. And at that point, I think it looks really bad for Intel overall. While they may be afloat, you're just a little while away from Nvidia going, we have our own CPU. And what at that point, you didn't give Nvidia the x86 license, or you did, now they got their own CPU, right? While they're paying you for the licensing, it's still, whatever. Uh, and now AMD and Intel have these GPUs that compete in that laptop space, and you're stuck without a GPU, without we'll see what the AI stuff is, but what if that NPU is also from Nvidia? You sold off your Altera, all this other stuff. Where are you at in all of this? That's my one concern where I'm like, man, Intel, I'm trying to think of the company I saw do something like this, within the last 5, 10 years. I was like, this is kind of the same path as that. There's a company out there that's got all this, fusion. Even, Intel just had what, with the CHIPS Act, a whole bunch of cash infusion there. Here we are, a little bit later, needing some more. Nvidia's in there. Really going to see where this takes us. Here, leave your comments and questions if you have any, so people can answer them, or and your name of what you think it should be, the fab should be called, as well in the comments below. I really do appreciate you supporting Rare Below and helping this channel grow. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that bell icon, as it really does help out the channel. And until next time, God bless.